All right. Welcome, everyone, to TradeView Live, episode 11. This is becoming now a long-time series here on LinkedIn. A lot's happened in the last 2 weeks since we met, but before we get into mini updates and analyses, we've got a jam-packed 28 minutes of content to get you all through. Quick introductions. My name's Ben. I lead strategic business development at Vizion, joined here by Kyle, our CEO and co-founder. Kyle, for any new audience members, what is TradeView?
TradeView is a product offered by Vizion. It's the industry-leading trade intelligence solution and market. We have more coverage over more ocean trade than any other platform. Our coverage is also forward-looking, and we'll get into that in a second. But we look at the shipment information and profile the activities of 1.5 million companies. We provide 90-day trade forecasts for companies, for products, for locations. And we provide tons of information around supplier and product networks. Plus, there's AI researcher capabilities built into the platform. We have a few different flavors of it, depending on who you are and what you need to explore intelligence and performance. But in a nutshell, that's what TradeView is.
And when you say forward-looking, what do you mean by that? How can TradeView? First, let's talk about where we get the data from. As we'll go into some of these insights and trends, where is all of this coming from?
Well, the good news is this is part of the answer to the question you started asking. So where does the data come from? So we source data in TradeView from many different sources. Fundamentally, it's data that comes from an ocean carrier in some way, shape, or form in some part. But then we also track all the container vessels in the world. We track containers moving over Class 1 railways. We track it through ports and terminals, et cetera. More data sources for tracking containerized freight than any other provider in market, with 270 plus. But the question is, how can you forecast the future? Well, with all that data, one of the additional data elements we pull in is from booking platforms, et cetera. We're able to pull in the bookings for ocean freight. And that allows us to see a lot of these shipments prior to them ever leaving origin, or prior to the goods even being put into the container at origin. So with that information, we're able to see the shipping plans for many different shipments in preparation, and are able to use that to then forecast what is happening in the future and break down those forecasts by companies, products, locations, et cetera.
Great. And for anyone that's new to TradeView Live, we're here to talk about what's going on in the world of shipping, most notably in the past few months, impacts from tariffs and different trade policies. But this is partially a demonstration of the data that TradeView is helping aggregate, as well as a discussion about what's been the response to the shipping community from what's happened, especially in the last not only 2 weeks, but especially in the last week.
And as a discussion, please leave comments here in the LinkedIn post. That's the TradeView Live session you're watching. We're seeing those come in live and are able to answer your questions either from information we have on hand, or we'll pull up the TradeView platform and show you how we pull the answer out live.
Yeah, many of the slides and trends that we report on now in TradeView Live originally came from an audience member who asked, "Hey, can you show us this instead?" Or this country or this type of product. So let's go through some of the high level statistics. This goes back to when we started reporting this in April. But for the last 5 weeks, we've seen a lot of volatility, a lot of up and down, obviously different announcements about this trade deal or that trade deal. What do things look like as far as these three views: global container bookings overall, U.S. import, and China to U.S.? Kyle, what's happened in the last 2 weeks?
Well, globally, we've seen a little bit of lift year over year comparison for ocean bookings. But week over week, it's just marginally down, down 1.7, 3.3%. So
relatively flat,
relatively comparable to last year with a touch of growth.
Yep. And U.S. import overall?
That's a touch more interesting. In short, week over week, it has been declining for the 3 weeks here, and we're going back to August 4th. We have this information up to date within 24 hours. If you ever need details, nearly up to yesterday, we can provide you this type of information. But for the purpose of our reporting and stuff, we have a 2-week lag for TradeView Live, but can give you more recent. But the year over year for the US, it is, we're slightly depressed compared to the previous year, kind of hovering around the 7 to 12% lower than we saw last year at this time. And a big chunk of that is this last chart here at the bottom. But generally, tariffs and the 90-day pause being over, and heavy tariffs being put on Brazil, heavy tariffs being put on India, we should be anticipating less freight coming into the United States in general than we have seen last year and potentially even the year before. But China, U.S. bookings, Ben.
Yeah, China to U.S.
is the big
story here. Obviously, we're all aware there was an additional extension on the sort of tariff pause or truce between the China and the U.S. as the larger trade deal is still worked out in its final details. So that deadline that was meant to expire earlier this week, we were given another 90 days. I think this is now the second or the third time that these potentially 100+ tariffs put on Chinese goods have been postponed. Despite that, we haven't seen a bounce back, right? We still continue to see that for China to US bookings, we are well below 2024 levels. And when we go into the slide that compares the last 2 years, we're actually below 2023 levels as well. So why don't we go into that? We'll start with global bookings to give a not just 12-month context, but in this case, going back 36 months to 2024 and 2023 levels. So globally, what we're seeing is that we are slightly above 2024. I think that's that small percentage.
2024.
And well above 2023. So when we think about the U.S.'s import activity or the China-U.S. relationship on overall global bookings for containers, not a significant impact. We saw the same sort of peak season behavior around that week of 21 that mimics what we saw in 2024.
And that makes some sense, right, then, because much of how the Chinese market has responded to the drop in demand from the United States has been, okay, well, we're going to shift this supply over to demand in Europe.
Exactly.
And keep the goods moving. So globally, you shouldn't see too much of a ding. You should actually see that normal type of 3% year over year global growth type of thing.
Right. So let's look at U.S. imports overall. Oh, I'm sorry. This is one additional look. We got some feedback on bookings as they relate to departures. This is just some clarification about the TradeView data itself. A booking can be placed 1 day before a departure occurs. A booking can be placed 1 month or 2 months before departure occurs. Bookings can also be canceled. So departure as a maybe more precise measurement of what's actually sailing on the water in that week. Wanted to show that visual. Departures you don't see as dramatic up and down. It's a little bit more of a normalized statistic. But as you can see for departures so far, we're similar to bookings, relatively flat, although bookings you do see a slight decline.
Yeah, and this just kind of communicates how different parties are booking freight kind of hedge also. Making multiple bookings, different locations, different carriers, canceling quite a few. We do have quite a bit of detail on booking cancellation rates as well, because the difference between these is the cancellations.
Yeah, that's
there's a few other outlier cases, but the vast majority are the cancellations.
And we will be diving into cancellation rates for a few specific regions just to give you all a flavor of what that can look like. But let's go to the next slide. I think this should be, U.S. import bookings for the last few years. Similar to, well, I guess we'll see this even more stated for U.S. imports from China. But again, we are below 2024 levels pretty significantly and just slightly below 2023 levels. That would be that green line. That you see us following. Really, the
2023 was something of a depressed year as well, because that was kind of the heart of the tail end of the COVID bullwhip, where everyone had too much inventory and they stopped ordering as much, and therefore we're shipping less.
And we're at the point now where there has been some additional clarity offered for imports from China, imports from India, where there's an extended tariff, where if you can get the container to arrive before this date, there's different dates depending on the country it's coming from, then you will not be subjected to this higher tariff. So the question is, now that that's been announced, are we going to start to see a potential surge in bookings, whether it's from China or other countries? That would be an indication that there's still an appetite for inventory before end of year, potentially even for spring inventory. That typically happens around this time. And when you look at 2024, that yellow line, that spike actually begins about now, about this time of year. It's a slight uptick for about a 4 or 5 week span. So will we see that happen again this year? We'll start to see that potentially in the next few weeks. And this is import bookings versus departures. It really shows the dramatic difference in some cases in certain parts of the year where heavy bookings were placed in week 19 following the sort of pause on tariffs, but not all of those bookings converted into departures. So probably a much higher cancellation rate around that period of time. China to US bookings, much more dramatic than just US imports overall. We are well below 2024 levels, and we are well below 2023 levels, and it continues to drop downward for overall bookings. You'll see that begin in week 22, 23, and it's really continued since then for the last 8 weeks. And then in terms of departures, we are seeing a decline. It's just not as prominent. We saw the climb following the truce that was put in place on week 19. Things are somewhat stable, although haven't necessarily returned to the volumes they were at before. So let's pivot a little bit to U.S. imports. There was a lot written about the latent data that's typically reported well after the fact for the month of July, where U.S. imports set almost record highs. We put out our forecast 2 weeks ago for what we would see arriving at the end of July and what we would see arriving in the first week of August. This shows that for what was reported by US CBP, we were within 4%. We were within less than 4% for the week of July 28th, and for the week that just ended last Friday, we were within 1%. So again, kudos to Vizion's data science team, the modeling using TradeView data. Pretty cool that we were not only able to predict this increase, which in the case of last week is about a 10% year-over-year increase to that week from the year before, but we predicted it within 1% of the total. And just so you all know, we are doing forecasts for individual ports. That's a service we offer to our customers. But for the sake of jumping to different topics over these 30 minutes, just wanted to give you all a quick update on U.S. import forecast overall.
But start asking us in the comments if you want us to tell you what our forecast is for specific ports across the world and the volumes that way.
Yeah. So let's pivot to a couple of countries that have been the target of President Trump's trade policies in the last month. Brazil, based on the current investigation to Bolsonaro, and the 50% tariff that is now in effect. From my latest understanding of reading White House press briefings and all the wonderful clarifications by different folks on LinkedIn as to how to interpret this, my understanding is this is now in effect. We do not have a deal with Brazil, and both imports from Brazil that we are applying a 50% tariff to, as well as Brazil's retaliation for U.S. exports to Brazil, are now in effect. And what we've seen is that beginning in week 26, when this was really just a rumor, a threat, all the way to today where it's now in effect, bookings have dropped dramatically coming from Brazil to the U.S. We are well below 20.
I can't quite tell what that might be as a percentage, but it looks roughly around 50%.
Yeah, close to 50% of 2024 levels. These are departures, which reflect a decline, although keep in mind this is going to be staggered. On average, a booking is placed about 2 weeks before departures. And so we do see departures decline in certain weeks, climb in others, depending on how much is loaded and when that vessel actually leaves.
Yeah, we would anticipate this dark blue line getting a little bit lower over the next 2 weeks because of such the decline in the bookings. Light blue line.
Yep. So this is Brazil to US. That's just a measure of daily average for May until today, a 7-day rolling average. So seeing that yellow line as the average really start to drop down beginning in early July, and it's continued since then. There was another question from a customer on our breakdown that we offered 2 weeks ago, which is what are the top types of products that we import from Brazil? We wanted to highlight just a few of the consignees that are named in these shipments as well. Now, any individual shipments, individual vessels, we can approach it on a case-by-case basis with some customers, but we did want to go ahead and just aggregate for all of 2025, who are the companies that are most likely to be impacted? And so when we look at the amount of rubber that we import from Brazil, the amount of wood products that we import from Brazil, it's not surprising that we have folks like Pirelli Tire, Hinton Rubber products that are named in this. It looks like some food and meat products as well, with Minerva Meats being impacted as well. Now, these are the consignees. So there might be Brazilian suppliers on the other side that are hurt by a decrease in orders. But ultimately, these consignees are the ones responsible for paying this higher tariff. So they're the ones who are going to really be facing that increased cost.
We had a question asked here, Ben, from Brian.
The question is, have you seen any changes or shifts in where goods are being imported from to the US? Are other countries winning business from China, India, or Brazil? So if we see bookings decline from China, India, and Brazil, are they increasing in other areas? Especially since the amount of arrivals coming into US ports has started to reach all-time record highs. And the answer is yes, the freight is coming from somewhere. It's not coming as much from China, India, and Brazil. But when we look at nearby Asian countries, I don't know if we have a slide for this.
I'm trying to pull up a chart inside TradeView now. That might help.
I would think that we'll see countries like Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand are seeing their shipments from those countries to the U.S. grow, while we see shipments from China, India, and Brazil decrease.
We'll move on to the next few slides while I'm separately trying to answer that question more detail.
Yeah, no, there's a lot we wanted to get through, and maybe in the last 10 minutes we can get to Brian's question. So the other question was about India. The threat of the 50% tariff on India is relatively new. So what's been going on with Brazil has been taking place a little bit longer, but recently, and this is mostly in regards to our conflict with Russia, India has been accused as one of the biggest buyers of Russian oil. Now, interesting statistic, Kyle, is that actually the European Union are one of the largest customers of Russia's energy products, mostly in natural gas. We have other countries like China that consume more of Russia's petrochemical products and Russia's oil products than even India. So I thought it interesting just to point that out. I have other statistics that validate that, but India has been kind of picked as this target to push them to buy less Russian oil. So the threat of 50% tariffs on India have not gone into effect just yet. I think there's an exception window offered if the container arrives before sometime in September. I don't have the exact date off the top of my head. But the issue is if you're booking containers to go from India to the US right now, they will likely not arrive on time. So by the time this exception was announced and the date was given in September, the average transit time to get from India to the US, we already passed that window. So even though this exception was offered, it doesn't really do much in that you can't go ahead and book a container to leave from India and get it into the US before that that extension window expires. But overall, booking trends are lumpy, I would say, for India. We're not seeing a precipitous decline just yet, but we are certainly below 2024 levels. In India, we would typically see a peak season, which is what we saw in 2024, close to 28,000 or above 28,000 containers booked per week, and we are nowhere near those levels. We can go to the next slide. And then in terms of departures, we did see a drop, especially in proportion to an increase in bookings from week 28 until week 30. But again, considering the lag between bookings and departures, I think it's possible departures will actually increase over the next couple of weeks. But the question is, now that we know the window for when containers need to arrive from India to the US, are we actually going to start to see some of these bookings get pulled back? And so even if I have a booking and I know I can get a container on a ship, do I want it to actually sail in the next 30 days, knowing that even if it arrives, it's not going to arrive in time, and I'm still going to be paying a 50% tariff? All of this, of course, could change in a matter of days, hours, or weeks if we're able to resolve our conflict with India. So again, what we see departing on the water right now, it's anyone's guess what the actual tariff will be that's applied to these containers when they get to the US. This is the expression similar to Brazil of the average for India to US bookings, which again, we haven't seen a drop like what we were seeing for Brazil to US bookings. In fact, it was recently an increase up until the first couple of weeks of August, which right now are mostly flat. Similar to Brazil, we wanted to share some of the companies that, especially in light of all the movements, all the nearshoring that's been happening, moving away from China or the China plus one strategy, we see some of the largest retailers in the US as representative of our imports from India. Of course, Walmart, Home Goods, Target, Costco, Kohl's, Old Navy, not just apparel companies, but we have some electronics companies like Yokohama as well. But I think there are some that are affected by the volume of goods, which is what we're seeing here, the highest, the top consignees in terms of volume. But you would think some electronics companies are impacted as well, even though they don't ship as many containers. The value of the goods in that container may affect them. So when we think about some of our smartphones, some of our computers, a lot of that has moved from China to India in the last 4 years, and potentially those are going to be subjected to a 50% tariff. Again, we don't know if there will be exceptions made for electronics or semiconductors or microchips or whatever it might be that we're importing from India. And in fact, we don't know if the 50% tariff will actually take effect in September. So cancellation rates. This was a question we got a couple of weeks ago, and wanted to go back to our first slide, which were global TEUs booked from the United States, from China to the United States, and from India to the US. So this shows those cancellation rates. We specifically filtered only for the most recent week ending in July. I think it was the week of July 7th. And the reason why is just recent bookings might not yet have been canceled or confirmed. So you'll see that the most recent week that these charts represent is not as soon as the week of August 7th. We just can't necessarily report on cancellations from last week. It hasn't been enough time yet. But overall, it appears that cancellation rates begin to spike, not necessarily right after Liberation Day, but about a month after. Those cancellation rates begin to drop. I think they're most prominent for global bookings overall, but we do see a very similar visual for US import bookings. In fact, you can say the spike is even more pronounced, and the decline since then. But similar view for India cancellation rate. China's has dropped, but not necessarily as dramatically.
Yeah.
In general, though, the cancellation rate is between 25 and 15% for really all these countries. So we're talking about a change of 5 to 7% in terms of the cancellation rate. Nothing impactful as far as like changing the cancellation rate from 20 to 40%. Nothing too dramatic.
And there are multiple elements affecting cancellation rates. Certainly the tariff roller coaster, but also the increased capacity, the new vessels coming online for carriers, essentially more supply of space than there was in the past, even if there are blank sailings, even if some ships are being taken out of service, etc. I'd also say that the demand appears to still be relatively strong because we've seen that compared year to year, global bookings are slightly up over the previous year and the year before that. So like the volume in terms of demand doesn't appear to have changed that much. But if we're seeing cancellations right now, it potentially is due to more capacity and more tariff concerns. But it is interesting to see that cancellation rates, even compared to the end of last year, are generally lower now than they were in the past. Yeah. And so this will be interesting to see how this plays out. It'll also be interesting maybe to go into a deeper dive on this in the future, where we look at cancellation rates over the past few years, right, and understand how they may have responded to different market changes and pressures.
Yeah. Other cancellation rates for other regions, we've got Brazil, Canada, Mexico, and Singapore in here as well, all showing a similar pattern of well, I guess other than Singapore, but both Brazil, Canada, and Mexico all showing a spike around the same time frame. It looks like that's roughly early May until mid-May, and then showing a decline in the cancellation rate. Brazil and Mexico, much higher cancellation rate, though. We're seeing almost 40% in its peak in what looks to be early June. That is double the cancellation rate from the US and from China that we were seeing on the previous slide.
And that's the last slide we have prepared, but I wanted to take a moment to comment and provide some information on Brian's question. So for Brian, I pulled up a Data Explorer table here that I just built. And what this is looking at only bookings. It's looking at bookings that were placed in the past, let's see here. Let me make sure I got this right. Past 3 months. There we go. Pulling this back up. And then it's sorting it by the volume of TEUs from what origin country to the United States. So we're seeing in the past 3 months, 2 million TEUs from China, 705,000 from Vietnam, 289 from India, 281 from Thailand, Korea 163, etc.
Kyle, sorry to stop you quickly, but we are still seeing your cancellation rates.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Thank you.
There we go. So this is what we have been seeing play out with, say, the top roughly 10 origins to the United States as bookings placed in the past, as I mentioned before, past 90 days roughly, and their volumes. If I bring up a comparison to the same information, but I'm looking at the same 3-month period from the year before, we can do a little bit of side-by-side comparison here. So China certainly is going to be the highest, but is Vietnam number 2 in 2025? Yes, still. Did I get this correct? Oh, no, make a quick correction here. This needs to be 2024. I just made a.
There you go. While you're fixing that, I want to answer. We had Eric ask, is it safe to assume lower bookings would lead to lower cancellation rates? I wouldn't assume that, to be honest. I think I could see why that could be a rational conclusion. I don't think that's going to necessarily always be the case. When we look at cancellation rates historically, we will look if cancellation rates go down when, bookings go down as well. But I don't necessarily think that's the case 100% of the time.
What's very interesting here is we see 1 million TEU difference, 1 million TEU difference between China the last 3 months of this year.
Yeah, it's
2 million.
3 million. Yeah.
In 2025, last 3 months. And the same time range in 2024 is 3 million.
Yep.
So that's pretty meaningful. But we have Vietnam next, India, Thailand, 778, 416, 328. We see this here. But if we switch over to looking at that for Vietnam, India, and Thailand, Vietnam, we have at 705 here compared to 778. So Vietnam has picked up 60, 70,000 TEUs. India, 289 compared to what it is back last year, which is 416, which is
so
very
interesting. All of them look to be below 2024 numbers. It's not that the freight has necessarily shifted away from China and we're importing more from Vietnam or India than we did before. But looks like volumes are down overall.
But this is a good question. So we should be digging into this a bit more. So Brian, please come back next week and let us give you a deeper dive on this one, because this will be an interesting question to learn more about how has freight shifted across the world in terms of volumes between countries.
Yep.
Very, very good question.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. I know we're a few minutes over. Thanks for staying a little bit longer, and we'll talk to you again in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.